She chose to draw water at the hottest, most miserable time of the day for one very simple reason. She did not want to be seen. Every morning, the other women of Sychar gathered at the town well together. The morning air was cool and pleasant, and the well served as the center of their social lives. They laughed loudly. They shared stories about their families. They braided each other's hair and happily helped one another carry their heavy, sloshing clay jars back to their homes. It was a beautiful time of community and friendship, but she waited until noon. She waited until the bustling streets were completely empty. She waited until the blazing, unforgiving sun drove everyone else indoors to seek shade. Because she knew exactly what happened when people saw her. The whispers would start. The harsh, judging stares would follow her down the street. Old wounds that she tried so hard to ignore would reopen, and painful memories would come rushing back into her mind. She was the outcast of her town, the woman everyone talked about but no one actually talked to. So, to protect her heart, she walked alone. The midday sun burned high above the region of Samaria, turning the dry, dusty road into a baking furnace. Heat waves shimmered and danced across the cracked ground as she made her slow, exhausting way toward Jacob's well. Her heavy, empty clay jar was pressed tightly against her side. But as she walked that dusty path, she carried much more than just an empty water jar. She carried deep regret. She carried an overwhelming loneliness that ached in her chest. She carried the crushing weight of a broken past she could never seem to escape, no matter how hard she tried. And today, just like every single day before this one, she expected to make the long journey completely alone, fill her jar in silence, and return to her quiet, isolated life. But today would be different. Today would be a day that altered the course of history, because someone was already waiting for her. Someone who knew every detail of her sad story before she even opened her mouth to speak a single word. Someone who had purposely crossed miles and miles of hostile, dangerous territory just for the chance to meet her. Before the sun set on this incredibly hot day, this mysterious stranger would uncover the dark secrets she had spent years trying desperately to hide. He would change her entire life forever, and he would take her deepest, darkest shame and turn it into a beautiful testimony that would echo throughout her entire town. But who was he? And why was he waiting beside that specific well? Jacob's well stood quietly just outside the Samaritan town of Sychar, resting at the foot of the great Mount Gerizim. Its ancient, weathered stones had witnessed many generations come and go. The great patriarch Jacob had dug this very well centuries earlier. Fathers had proudly brought their sons here to drink. Mothers had brought their daughters. Tired travelers from all over the world had stopped here to rest their aching feet. The woman knew every single stone of this well. She had come here hundreds, perhaps thousands of times. But as she approached the ancient stones today, she stopped in her tracks. She had never seen anything like this. A man sat quietly beside the well. At first glance, she knew immediately that he was Jewish. His traditional clothing gave his identity away. Thick dust clung to his leather sandals, and his face showed the deep weariness of a very long, hard journey. Most Jewish travelers avoided the region of Samaria altogether. The anger and hostility between Jewish people and Samaritan people ran incredibly deep. Fueled by hundreds of years of bitter history, many travelers would gladly add several days of exhausting walking to their journey, crossing the dangerous Jordan River twice, just to avoid stepping foot inside Samaritan territory. Yet this man had come straight through the heart of the land, and now he sat completely alone beside a Samaritan well, waiting. She slowed her pace, her heart beating a little faster. Every natural instinct in her body told her to turn around and leave. A Jewish man and a Samaritan woman? Nothing good could possibly come from that conversation. History told her it would only lead to insults or arguments. Keeping her eyes firmly locked on the dusty ground, she quietly approached the well. Her plan was simple. She would draw her water as fast as she could and leave before he could say an unkind word to her. Then the stranger spoke. "Will you give me a drink?" She froze, her hands gripping her clay jar tightly. For a moment, she genuinely wondered if the heat was playing tricks on her, and she had heard him incorrectly. A Jewish man was speaking to her. The request sounded simple enough on the surface, but beneath those words, it shattered centuries of cultural, racial, and social barriers. Slowly, carefully, she turned toward him. "You are a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman," she replied, her voice guarded. "How can you ask me for a drink?" She fully expected awkwardness. She expected him to realize his mistake with embarrassment. Perhaps she even expected an apology or a harsh retort. Instead, the stranger simply looked up at her and smiled. It wasn't the arrogant smile of someone trying to win a religious argument. It was the warm, gentle smile of someone who already knew her heart. "If you knew the gift of God," he said softly, "and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman frowned her brow, wrinkling in deep confusion. "Living water?" She glanced down into the dark opening of the well. It was deep, very, very deep. The man sitting before her had no thick rope. He had no leather bucket. He had no clay jar. How exactly did he plan to draw this amazing water he was talking about? "Sir," she said, gesturing toward the deep stone hole, "you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well?" The stranger's expression remained perfectly calm. He was incredibly patient. He was wonderfully kind. Then he answered her with words that seemed to carry the weight of eternity. "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again." He pointed a tired finger toward Jacob's well. "But whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life." Something powerful and unexplainable stirred deep inside her chest. She didn't fully understand his mysterious words, but somehow they reached deeper than her mind. They reached her soul. Because if she was truly honest with herself, she had spent her whole life feeling incredibly thirsty. Not for physical water. She was thirsty for peace. She was thirsty for real acceptance. She was thirsty for something, anything that could finally fill the aching, hollow emptiness she carried with her every single day. "Sir," she said quietly, a hint of desperate hope in her voice. "Give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." There was a brief, heavy silence in the midday heat. Then Jesus said something completely unexpected. "Go, call your husband and come back." The words hit her like a sudden, violent gust of wind. Her heart tightened painfully in her chest. Of all the directions this strange conversation could have gone, she hadn't expected that. Her protective walls instantly slammed back up. She looked away, refusing to meet his eyes. "I have no husband." Her answer was short, careful, highly guarded. She told a partial truth to hide a massive lie. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Only the sound of the hot wind blowing across the grass filled the air. Then, Jesus nodded slowly. "You are right when you say you have no husband." The woman looked up, surprised, and then came the words that shattered her world and changed absolutely everything. "The fact is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband." The whole world seemed to stop spinning. Her breath caught sharply in her throat. Her eyes widened in absolute shock. How? How could he possibly know that? She had never met this man in her entire life. No one had introduced them to one another. No one had even spoken her name out loud. Yet somehow, he knew. He didn't just know a tiny detail. He didn't just know a piece of town gossip. He knew the deep, secret pain she carried every single day. He knew the broken, messy chapters of her life she desperately wished she could erase. He knew every terrible failure. He knew every heartbreaking disappointment. He knew every failed attempt to find happiness in the arms of another person. He knew every wound. He knew everything. For a moment, all the sounds around her completely disappeared. The blowing wind, the rustling dry grass, the distant, faint sounds from the town of Sychar. Everything faded to nothing. There was only this stranger sitting by the well, and the impossible, staggering truth that he knew her completely. Yet, as she looked at his face, she realized something amazing. He wasn't looking at her with disgust. He wasn't condemning her or calling her worthless. He wasn't mocking her pain. His eyes held pure, unconditional compassion. It was the exact kind of compassion she had spent years desperately searching for. The kind of love that sees the absolute worst, ugliest parts of who you are, and decides to stay anyway. "Sir," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I can see that you are a prophet." Suddenly, questions flooded her mind. Big questions she had carried in her heart for years. Questions about God. Questions about how to worship properly. Questions about what was actually true. The Samaritans fiercely believed they should worship on Mount Gerizim. The Jews firmly believed people must worship in the temple in Jerusalem. Who was right? Where did God truly want to be worshipped by his people? Jesus answered her questions patiently and gently. Then, he revealed something far greater than she could have ever imagined. A time is coming, and has now come, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. The woman listened carefully to every single syllable. Every word he spoke seemed to pull her closer to a light she had been seeking her entire life. Finally, feeling a spark of real faith, she said, almost as if she were speaking to herself, "I know that the Messiah is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us." Jesus looked directly into her wide, tear-filled eyes, and then he spoke the words that would change history forever. I, the one speaking to you, I am here. Silence. Total, absolute silence. For a moment, she couldn't move a muscle. She couldn't think. She could barely breathe. The Messiah, the chosen one that all of Israel had waited centuries for, the Savior of the world, the promised one. He was sitting right here, standing before her in the dust. He wasn't speaking to an important, wealthy priest. He wasn't speaking to a powerful king on a throne. He wasn't speaking to a highly educated religious leader. He was speaking to her, a broken woman whom everyone else avoided. A lonely outcast who came to the well at noon just because she didn't want to be seen. Out of all the people in the world, the Messiah had chosen to reveal his true identity to her. Right at that miraculous moment, his disciples returned from the town with food. They stopped in their tracks, their faces painted with shock and quiet judgment. They were deeply surprised to find their teacher speaking with a woman, especially a Samaritan. You could see the disapproval in their eyes. But Jesus did not move away from her. His posture remained welcoming, directly contrasting their silent judgment. No one dared to interrupt the sacred moment. The woman barely even noticed the disciples had arrived. Her mind was racing with joy. Her heart felt truly alive for the first time in years. Everything in her universe had changed. Without even realizing what she was doing, she turned and left her heavy water jar sitting, completely forgotten beside the well. Leaving that jar was the ultimate symbol of her changed heart. The very reason she had walked out into the blazing heat was suddenly completely unimportant. Her physical thirst no longer mattered, because her spiritual thirst had finally been quenched. She had found the living water. She turned on her heels and ran as fast as she could toward the town. She ran straight toward the exact same town she usually avoided. She ran down the same streets she normally walked, through with her head bowed down in shame. She ran toward the exact same people whose cruel whispers she had feared her entire life. This time, she didn't hide. She ran straight toward them. "Come," she shouted at the top of her lungs, her face glowing with pure joy. People turned their heads in shock. Neighbors stepped cautiously outside their doors. Busy merchants looked up from their hard work in the marketplace. "Come see a man who told me everything I ever did." Could this be the Messiah? There was something profoundly different in her voice that made people stop what they were doing and listen. This wasn't the same quiet, broken woman they knew. The heavy blanket of shame was completely gone. The crippling fear was gone. A bright, beautiful hope had taken its place. One by one, people began dropping their tools and leaving the town. A massive, curious crowd of Samaritans made their way out into the heat, walking toward Jacob's well. And because of the brave testimony of this one outcast woman, many people in that town believed in Jesus that day. The woman who had spent her life hiding from everyone suddenly became the joyful messenger who brought an entire town to meet Jesus. The woman who once feared being seen by anyone became a shining light that was impossible to ignore. The woman who came to the well carrying a heavy burden of shame left carrying the greatest hope the world has ever known. And that is the beautiful, life-changing truth at the very heart of this ancient story. Jesus did not arrive in the dusty land of Samaria by accident. He came on purpose. He intentionally crossed cultural, social, and racial boundaries that others stubbornly refused to cross. He walked exhausting miles through difficult territory that most people completely avoided. He sat beside a very specific well at a very specific hour of the day because he knew a very specific, hurting woman would be there. He didn't wait there to condemn her. He didn't wait there to embarrass her in front of others. He didn't come to remind her of all her terrible failures and broken relationships. He came simply to offer her living water, the kind of water that finally satisfies the deepest, most desperate thirst of the human soul. And that exact same invitation still stands for you today. Whatever heavy regrets you are carrying around in your heart, whatever past mistakes still haunt your mind late at night, whatever dark shame makes you want to hide away from the rest of the world so no one can see you, Jesus already knows. He knows every single messy chapter of your unique story. He knows every failure. He knows every secret you have kept hidden. He knows every deep wound that still hurts. Yet, knowing all of that, he still comes looking for you. He seeks you out just as intentionally as he came looking for that lonely woman at the well, because his amazing grace is so much greater than your difficult past. His gentle mercy is so much deeper than your deepest shame. And the beautiful, life-giving living water he offers will never, ever run dry.